Left-wing radicals continue to grasp at anything they can as their agenda is crumbling. It's especially seen in Virginia, where left-wing activist group The Lincoln Project sent Democrat activists to identify as white supremacists and attempt to disrupt Glenn Youngkin's campaign event. The left is crumbling before our eyes, and it is time to capitalize. This is the Closet Conservative Podcast. The radical left's agenda for the nation is crumbling before our eyes. Democrats seized control, whether illegal or legal, in the 2020 election and have made promises for near wide-open spending and little, if any, regard for the national debt. Joe Biden has campaigned on trillions of dollars in spending as the progressives have pushed for more. But now we see that crumbling before our eyes. It's evident all across the country, but maybe it's even more evident in Virginia right now, which will have an election on Tuesday for governor. Glenn Youngkin has been surging in the polls over the last 6 to 8 weeks and is now essentially tied going into the election with Terry McAuliffe. Why would a state that has been reliably liberal for many years, in the middle of a great push of the liberal agenda, consider going red? It's the crumbling agenda of the radical left, of course, which is why McAuliffe has brought in all the big guns in order to try to win the race. He had Obama into Virginia in an attempt to smear Glenn Youngkin and tie him to President Trump and what the radical left is calling radical Trumpism. Now his activist groups are sending young Democrats to Youngkin events trying to claim that they are all in for Youngkin and that they are white nationalists. Twitter quickly outed them as left-wing radicals and Democrat activists, ending any chance of the staged event helping McAuliffe. Now let's be clear, I'm not convinced this is the only thing that the McAuliffe campaign and the others have planned for the weekend. After all, that's the Democrats' way. They want to go after Youngkin and win this race. They need it to salvage and save the agenda. That is what is at stake. This is not about just Virginia. This is about the entire radical agenda. Joe Biden told Democrats behind closed doors this week that the next 2 weeks would define their leadership in Congress and his presidency. Now, I'll be honest, I think that the last 10 months have already defined his presidency as a failure. Congress was well defined as well. There's nothing changed in Congress. It has been defined as a failure for quite some time under Democrat leadership. Biden knows that if they lose Virginia, it is a clear sign from voters that they do not want the radical left's agenda. That's what the polls have been saying for quite some time, and that's what Americans have been telling their reps in Congress. But Democrats are convinced that they can force Americans into submission if they can push through their spending and entitlement agenda. But a loss in Virginia will blow some major holes into the Democrats' plans. They have claimed that this is what Americans want. But to have Americans tell them in this election that they clearly do not want this radical agenda, it's going to destroy any movement that they have. Biden knows this. Democrats know this. The agenda is crumbling. So they're doing everything they can to pull off the win in Virginia. But let's get one thing straight. If they lose in Virginia, Tiki torches and Democrat activists are the last of our worries. If Democrats lose in Virginia, they will go all aggressive, and they're going to work to set our entire nation on fire more than it already is. By aggressive, I mean progressive, because the progressive wing is going to argue that it is the moderates that are pushing Americans away. Moderates are going to argue that it is the progressives holding up the agenda that is causing the issue. And that is exactly what we need on the conservative side right now. We need them to continue their fighting. But we also need to be doing something about it. It's one thing for Republicans to simply say that Democrats are trying to destroy our nation. It's one thing to call out the border crisis and the continued climb of the national debt. It's one thing to call out the massive spending and how it will crush our economy. It's also one thing to call out the track record of Biden with massive inflation, continued coronavirus restrictions, and mandates that Republicans are losing their jobs over. The man who promised to build back better has only destroyed the great things that we had. This is where conservatives need to step up once again and provide a plan to lead our nation from the destruction and chaos of the radical left and back into prosperity. We need to explain how the tax cuts work, how they help Americans, and that simply raising taxes on the rich will do nothing. We need to outline our plan of exactly what we would do if we were in control of Congress. Those things should include balancing the budget, reducing the national debt, and promoting freedom for all Americans. They should also include some ideas for how we can get moderate Democrats on board. I think it's clear there are those on both sides that support working on infrastructure, but that does not mean we spend massively without budgeting for it and planning for it. Give a clear path for how we move on from the pandemic without forcing Americans to take a vaccine through mandates that they do not want. Give clear reasons to set the right apart from the left. This shouldn't be just coming from President Trump or those that are aligned with President Trump. This is something that should be coming from anyone and everyone on the right who values our nation and wants to defend it from radical tyranny. So while the agenda is crumbling, let's capitalize. Let's get active and do something about it. Rather than just sitting back and watching, let's actually lead once again. The Closet Conservative Podcast is a production of The Liberty Loft. Copyright The Liberty Loft 2021. You can find more shows and information on our website, www.thelibertyloft.com, or on any of our social media channels. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave a 5-star review, and share the podcast with your friends.